to Educating Geeks, the podcast where friends help friends discover new passions. We're recording live at the Comic Media... No, we're not. So we were going to record live, and we did record live. Kind of. But the computer that we were saving our file into decided that I had ignored it for too long, and it needed to reboot itself to run some updates.
Thanks, Windows.
Thanks, Windows. So we lost it. So we are actually gathered in the regular studio today to essentially recreate the fabulous podcast that was at the Comic and Media Expo, which was at the Mesa Convention Center. Remember?
October something.
7th through the 9th.
Yeah, there we go. October 7th through the 9th. So.
And we will
17th through the 19th. 17th through the 19th.
There was a 7 and a 9 in that date.
There was indeed.
Thanks, Cassie.
Very good. Very good. However, we were able to save the drinking game rules. So the drinking game rules will be a live capture from the day. All right. So I am Geek host Alice. And on the panel today we have
Andrea,
Sara,
and Cassie.
And today we are educating Sara on the iconic web series, The Guild. So Sara, you never watched The Guild.
No, I hadn't, and I had heard of it. Surely, I was very active on the Whedon-esque website, where I not so much lately, but back when The Guild came out, I was very active reading everything I could on every Joss Whedon project or Joss Whedon casted star project or producers. Whedon-esque is a great board for finding everything you can out about everybody involved in the Whedonverse. So I was very aware of its existence, but I'm not a gamer, and I've never played a massive multiplayer online role-playing game.
Multi?
What did I say?
Massive multi-online RPG.
Okay.
And you were worried about recreating our time at Comic Media.
That was
spot on.
I still don't know what
MMORPG.
So I had never really paid attention to it because I didn't think I could identify with it. And even then, when I was in charge of kind of seeking out web series and stuff for Phoenix Comic-Con, I just never, I was like, I need to sit down and watch this. I feel like this is kind of iconic as far as web series go, and I just never got around to it. And then they were like, do you want to be educated? And I said, sure.
Hesitantly.
Kind of.
So how about you, Drea? You were a fan, right?
Yeah, I really like this series. For one of the first times on a podcast, I don't get to get educated. So yay. Cassie was say Cassie's like,
word
up. No, I don't know what it was that got me watching it to begin with. I wasn't an uber WoW player or anything like that, but I definitely had played, and I definitely had lots of friends that was... I still have lots of friends that's very important to them. And I don't remember exactly what got me in, but I just remember I really enjoyed it. And I watched it up until the change from online to Microsoft.
5 to 6? Or the one
Earlier.
before earlier?
3 to
2 to 3?
4.
Or is it 3 to 4?
I think it's 3 to 4.
Yeah. Okay.
And then picked it up again after and watched the ones I'd missed and caught up. And then the last season, the break between the last season,
right,
where the shift kind of happened, that I didn't watch that. And this was my first watch through for that last season. But
okay.
Yeah, but that was something I did really enjoy, because I did get a lot of the
jokes.
Yeah, references. There we go.
Yeah.
And the jokes.
Game references. Yeah. How about you, Cassie? I to tell you honestly, when I had learned that you had watched this series and were really trying to get Megan to watch it, I have to admit I was kind of surprised, because I know you're not a huge video gamer.
I'm not. I'm like Drea, I'm like, no. I'm sorry, I'm like Sara, no, but I'm like Andrea where I was watching it. So it's like, I'm not really a gamer. I don't get most of the really intense jokes, although some of their references and some of their jokes are explained in some way. Like, there's enough context where you can be like, got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's applicable outside of that.
It's not alienating to non-gamers at all.
Exactly, yeah. So with that said, I watched it because of the the independent content creator factor. So the fact that, it was not a studio produced show. And at the time, there weren't a lot of quality web series out there. There weren't really even many web series at all. And Felicia Day was kind of one of those people who spearheaded that. So that's how I was familiar with it, just in that way of, writers creating their own content and not waiting for a studio to pick it up or not waiting for funding. And even still, it of course helped that she's an actor. And she's, from the Whedonverse and and had those connections certainly, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that an idea, which was originally a TV pilot, would have been a slam dunk. So I just admired their efforts there, and it was nice to see how the production values increased and
over time. For sure. I think I got exposed. It was either the ex or some guys I knew at work who were big WoW players who were also very just tapped into the geek world in general, had talked about it. And so I went and checked it out and enjoyed it for all of the reasons why I think most people enjoy it, because it's well written and it's funny and
you can relate.
Some of those characters are just so lovable.
Yeah, for sure. And I have played WoW, I think perhaps to the same amount Drea has, and I have mentioned several times what my reaction to WoW was. But I've also played Star Wars The Old Republic, which is another MMORPG with many of the same mechanics, although I sucked with a lightsaber, which is just depressing, right? I mean, if you're going to play a Star Wars-based video game, you want to be good with a light, but I sucked anyway. So yeah, I got most of the gaming references, and I, like you were saying, Sarah, it's just geeky references. You don't even necessarily.
And it's layered enough that it's not specific only to certain audiences. It's not necessarily a broad show, but it's layered enough so that everybody can find something that they identify with.
It's very relatable.
Yeah, with the characters and whatnot. And so speaking of characters, who was everybody's favorite? Mine changed, I have to admit. I think I started out the series totally Codex, which is Felicia Day's character. But the more I've watched the series, which I think I'm probably on my maybe 4th or 5th watch through, Vork has become my favorite character.
And you cosplayed him at...
I did cosplay him at the convention.
Quite well.
Oh, why, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think when I first started watching it, I think I always have appreciated Codex. And I think the first time I watched it through, I just loved Tink. Because I was kind of in my late teens, early 20s, and super angsty, and I was like, yeah, she's so cool. God, she's totally not cool, whatever.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Sounds like
And then when I watched it again lately, now that I'm not so angsty, I like to think I'm not so angsty. I'll leave that up to you.
We'll be the judge of that, right?
Yeah, I'll let you all determine that for yourself.
It is impossible to be as angsty as we are when we are in our late teens.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that's true.
You're safe.
Yeah,
So
I definitely think that I related more to Clara, and I really loved her, and she just made me laugh the whole time. Imagining, because I don't particularly want to have children, but I imagine if I did have children, I would maybe be a less extreme version of that.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, I don't think I would just let them roam free in the department store with the other half of a baby monitor, but I would be yay. Yeah. All right, mommy's got stuff to do.
Right. They would know not to unplug things. They would know not to interfere.
Mommy's recording a podcast now.
That's right.
How about you?
I started from kind of the opposite approach, writing down the characters I didn't like to maybe try to find one that I did.
So who are your top 3? How about that?
I disliked everybody.
What?
I think I disliked Codex the least because I can definitely identify with the angsty former musician trying to solve everybody else's problems instead of her own. And I'm really glad that there's a bunch of character development throughout the season so that they went from one-dimensional, douchey, rapey, angsty idiots to more fully fleshed out and relatable and human characters. And so I did like them a lot more. But it was really the secondary characters that I liked. I liked Blades' little sister. And then Tink's mom gets an honorable mention as my second favorite character.
So interesting that you said that. So let me word it differently. So whose character arc did you like the best?
That's a really good question. I don't remember how I answered it at con. I feel like we covered this.
Did we? Okay.
I don't know.
No, I think
maybe.
we just talked about the characters you disliked the least, I think was...
Yeah. I definitely liked Zabu getting, more independent. I liked...
And not being quite so douchey and rapey. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay, we also need to clarify this whole rapey thing because... If you haven't watched the show yet, it would be...
yes, he does not rape anyone.
No. There is no actual rape.
Sorry.
We're
being flippant.
Yes.
We apologize.
Just want to put that out there for those who haven't seen it yet.
Yes,
fair. It's not Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Right.
Correct. Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you for pulling it in. I appreciate it.
But it's still kind of the flippancy of, like transgressed boundaries is pretty endemic to most of the seasons and a lot of the characters. Which really made me uncomfortable.
Now, I can understand that fine line because they did, and I think that's a line that many male characters kind of
get forced to walk.
Yeah, and it's just acceptable, and given recent events with Gamergate and things like that, that's maybe like the lighter side of that, or maybe the less extreme example of how awkward males between a certain age range think they can act a certain way. But I did kind of just attribute his behavior to some element of Asperger's or some some
obsessive
disorder. Some sort of disorder that when it came down to it was not truly harmful. But I can see what you mean about the lack of boundaries, which she spent a good 2 seasons trying to lay down.
Right, and then decides that maybe she needs to try that. So she got worn down too, Right, she decides in the end. But was it, I feel like I'm about to say some words that are not my own, so I'm thinking maybe Sandeep said them at his panel, that he, at least, if I'm not imagining this, really felt like for all of his ickiness of that character, that ultimately he really was a very loving guy, but just didn't know how to rein in or how to appropriately express that, and that he really did, the character really did care about people, but just was unable to manage how to show that.
Yeah, and I think that was accurate. I mean, all actors have to kind of like wank their character bits a little bit to make it believable and to love their character, but I think that's true.
So now I'm curious if Sarah, you're talking about Zabu's kind of like over affection for, everyone,
but Codex in specific.
Or if you're talking about Zabu's relationship with Riley that made you really uncomfortable.
A lot of it. I mean, there was obviously like Blade's sexual harassment of Tink taking advantage of that, Zabu not taking no for an answer from Codex, and then Riley was her name. Yes. Riley, being pretty abusive to Zabu. It just kind of went all around, and nobody really demonstrated like healthy relationship boundaries.
They did kind of dance around the topic, and no one said like, hey, this is not okay.
Yeah, I felt like there were a lot of kind of stereotypes within gaming. As an outsider, I see stereotypes rather than gamers. And I feel like this perpetuated a lot of the really negative ones, possibly in a way that a gamer might be like, oh yeah, I know that guy, and not see as much harm in it as an outsider with an already negative kind of attitude about it, perspective. And I remember watching it and thinking like, why aren't gamers all up in arms about this? Like, these are like stereotypes that they're they're negative stereotypes that each character is reinforcing, and everybody seems cool with it, and none of it's being addressed.
Well, I mean, my reaction to it is because it's comedy, right? And much of what comedy does is take the truth of something, and I do happen to be someone who believes that most stereotypes are based in truth, right? And so if as a comedian where you find your humor is to talk truth, which many of them do, she's taking these stereotypes and putting them out there in a funny way to say, to look at this is wrong. I'm not going to flat out and do my PSA and say this is wrong, we need to stop, but I'm going to present it in a way that if you're at all savvy, you're going to be able to look at it and be like, ew, yeah, that's kind of gross and that's wrong, and you're going to see that stuff in it without having to point a figure and call it what it is. So, and I would also say that, stereotypes about not understanding your boundaries, not being a good communicator, and all of those things are not necessarily even endemic in gaming, but they are, stereotypes that we can relate to in other aspects of our life, whether you game or not.
Right.
Yeah, I think they're more geek
just social awkwardness.
Yeah.
I think I know some football players who have some boundary issues. Just laying it out there.
True.
Well, and the interesting thing, I think, because I know that when we talked the last time, the relationship between Riley and Zabu in particular kind of made you uncomfortable in the manner in which it was perceived or portrayed. Thank you.
Yeah.
But for me, I think we get so caught up in this abuse culture with women as always the victim, and that's definitely not true, but that's what gets portrayed in media and things like that. So I think it was an interesting way to cast a light on that as well, that it's not a one-way street, and that it doesn't, and that part of Zabu's growing arc is to grow up and realize he's worth it, and that he can say, no, Riley, this isn't for me. Like, move along, sweetheart, or whatever, however he put it.
My issue, though, was that they brought it to light, but it was always with it being funny. Yeah. And it was never really, it was really, there were weird things. And again, you and I, Sarah, we both were bugged by that whole dynamic, but it was never, and I agree, he did say I'm worth it, and that was part of his whole arc and how, and then soon after that in the next season he realized he's good being friends with Codex, but which I like, because Zabu is my favorite character of all of them. But the way that ended with him basically being like, he stood up for himself, and because it is comedy and it's like comedy, it's not meant to be preachy. But then she turned around and just started making out with the girl in the wheelchair. And I was just like, it seemed a little base, lowest common denominator way to wrap that up. And then that was it.
So it's meant to be a comedy. For me, it's meant to be a comedy. It's meant to make things big. It's meant not to take, she's making a statement, but she doesn't want it to be taken too seriously. She doesn't want to seem preachy or on a pedestal, but she wants to point out that there are these things that she's experienced and seen in her life, because she's said before this is based on personal experiences, at least at the very beginning. So, for me, I was like, well, it was nice to see it and not have it be really overly dramatic and overly emotional, because those topics can get really intense really fast.
But if you bring something up and you don't address it, you're complicit in perpetuating it. And I don't think she even cast a sideways glance at it. She just presented it without commentary, which I think is just as bad as complicitly allowing it to happen.
So
funny.
Sure. So I think that's definitely just a humor is one of those areas where it's so personal, and either that it's going to connect with you or it's not going to connect with you. So for me, watching the Guild and the whole situation with Riley, I was also like, ugh, gross. But it was enough. It was done with enough, for me, what I perceived as intentional comedy, for her to be actually, saying that this isn't a good thing, and we're going to actually show you in the end how he realizes it's not a good thing, and that Codex is championing for him to realize that it's not a good thing, that there was enough other elements in there that it just really I wasn't like, shame on you, Felicia Day, for not dealing with this in a real manner.
It didn't sit badly with you.
Yeah, well, it sat badly with me, but in the way that she handled it in the story, I wasn't thinking to myself, this is a bad situation and this person needs to get their comeuppance, because I'm definitely somebody in fictional stories. If somebody is behaving badly, Game of Thrones, I want the person who's behaving badly to suffer horribly for what they've done. Or Walking Dead, HBO in general. I want bad behavior to be rewarded with a slap in the face, whereas in this situation it didn't feel that way to me.
I guess, though, if it had been reversed, I feel like people, first of all, it wouldn't have happened. As a woman, she probably wouldn't have had a female dorky character being treated that way by a male, but it would not have been as well received. I think there is a double standard, just kind of inherently where we accept it. But I mean, it didn't happen, so I mean, I'm assuming that people would have been up in arms had the roles been reversed. But I think more often than not, we are more likely to have a visceral reaction when the woman is the victim.
Yeah,
but I mean, it was funny, but again, all of those secondary characters they all just felt like tropes. They had the black guy who's aggressive and ghetto and an asshole. Yeah,
for sure.
And then they randomly, the woman in the wheelchair is like insane. And I don't know, like that's not a trope. Like that's not something people think of, but it was like a very extreme, like they were trying to go in another direction where she was strangely empowered, but like empowered through darkness, which is okay in some ways, but again, like a lot of them just felt like they were so extreme. And we talked about this in our last chat that if we'd had more time to spend with those characters, there probably would have been more depth, but they served a purpose for the season they were in. They were in, they were out, that was it. So I understand that with limited amount of time, they pretty much they were there to create the comedy, there to essentially be the United Nations of nerds. And that was that. But I couldn't help but feel I just didn't connect with a lot of those tertiary, secondary characters because they were so extreme.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I do. I mean, for all of it, what I perceived as playing the stereotype for humor, it is as you just mentioned there's a lot of representation in that cast. Whether you ultimately agree with how they had that representation portrayed, there's a lot of
they at least did
variety of individuals. It's not completely whitewashed. It's not all men. It's not all standing people, or however you would say that.
All standing people.
I've never heard that. What does that even mean?
Not confined to
not in a wheelchair. Clearly, that's a new way to put it.
Clearly, I should not be a comedy writer. That fell flat.
That was unintentionally hilarious. Now that I understand what you were referring to, yes, it was. They reflected all people, and yes, and for me, diversity means many things. So,
right.
I'm always for. I love that we, had someone who's an Indian protagonist. I love that we had Asian protagonists. I think we don't have enough of those in general still in 2014, which is really bizarre.
Right.
So yeah, I agree. She did, especially with the primary cast, make sure that was diverse.
Well covered.
I just, when I looked at the cast and the diversity, like I didn't go quite so deep into it in terms of like, well, this is a stereotype and this is just their kind of trope. Like for me, I took it as she's trying to show that late 20s early 30s black police officer who has like this very ghetto attitude or whatever you want to say, and a gay guy working at a call center, and a very dark young early 20s like handicapped girl. Like all of these people have this one thing in common. They all play this game.
Yeah, they
like
all play
the game reaches everyone, and I think for me that's what I took as she was trying to show is like it goes everywhere for everyone.
I think that's absolutely true.
Unless you're like somebody with healthy boundaries, or
and I think
but I don't. Yeah, well, so in this case, but that's what she was going for, right? So if everyone on that show would have had healthy boundaries, it would have been a very different kind of show.
It would have been very boring.
I don't know about boring. I mean,
funnier to me.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So I think for me, I just didn't. I try not to overthink it, and I 100% see where everything you're saying and coming from. For me, I try not to overthink them too much like that. And I'm like, well, at least she did a nice job of trying to show that, this game can touch Vork, who's,
right, Vork and Blades, right? At two
right,
opposite
like,
ends of the
when
spectrum.
are they ever going to be together, connected by anything ever again?
True.
Or Tink and Clara. Like,
actually,
when are you ever going to put those two together?
I could see Vork and Blades sharing a jail cell. Actually.
For very different reasons.
So they may reunite one day.
Yeah, and I would say that I also like how they all had bad behavior. So it wasn't like they were just picking out a certain type of individual who is displaying bad behavior, but pretty much the bad behavior was like widely spread to everyone.
There was nobody who was perfect on that show.
And flawed characters are fun, and I think one of the inherent problems with a web series is just length. So,
right, sure.
I mean, the length of their season is like the length of 2 regular 22-minute episodes or something like that. Like, it's really, you don't have a lot of time to like dwell, even in very still hilarious but very character based humor or maybe more in-depth humor. Everyone was in character. I do feel like everyone was consistent, which I think is pretty hard to do over how many years they wrote that and with that very little time.
Right.
I rarely felt, can't even think of a time where I felt like anyone acted out of character.
But they were still able to grow.
And they were
which
still
I
able to
definitely appreciated. I remember looking at the IMDb credits to see who wrote it and was very impressed that she wrote almost all of it herself, because there were like as much of a problem as I have with the characters and their flaws kind of taking center stage, it was very beautifully crafted, over each season's arc and over the arc of the whole series. She did get into some really neat storytelling by way of, the game as a metaphor for life and life as a metaphor for the game, which even as a non-gamer, I was able to appreciate. And I like how everybody had their role and nobody tried to take over anybody else's role. And, nobody tried to be the Vork. Or I don't want to say I disliked it, and I don't want to say that I liked it, but Felicia Day is very well accomplished, I would say, in a lot of areas with what she did with this series. So
you can appreciate it.
I can appreciate
even
it, even if I didn't like it.
Gotcha.
But I definitely appreciate the skill that went into all of it.
I mean, I'll confess, for the various times that I've seen it, but I've definitely had different reactions to it different times I've watched it. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, if there's another fracking potty humor joke, whatever, and then, sometimes I'm just like, hey, poop, there's another poop joke,
it depends on your mood when you're watching it, truly.
Really.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, talking about secondary and tertiary characters, how about the ones we loved, like Mr. Wiggly?
Mr. Wiggly, I do.
I loved Mr.
him.
Wiggly.
I loved him as a character. And for all of his faults, I liked Fox. Because he's so ridiculous. He's just so ridiculous. And I can,
I know
guys
people
I knew
like
in college, like I knew guys that were like that, So I definitely, in those, stereotypes that she used, I could find people, for the most part, that I could plug into those characters for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I loved his arc as a secondary character, that she gave him a little bit more of an arc than maybe she gave some other secondary characers.
Yeah,
we can speculate all on, that's what it was. But like the reveal when they were at the con and stuff like that. Like
that was a surprise.
That was a surprise, and I liked that arc. I liked that vulnerability.
It was kind of redeeming.
Yeah.
I think that my problem with some of the characters that I liked the least was that there was nothing really that redeemed them. Whereas with Fox and with Clara too, like I felt so uncomfortable with all of her like bad parenting. I couldn't detach myself enough to see the humor, even though I don't even like kids. Like I don't want kids of my own. I don't like spending time with most kids. Alice's kid is like one of the 2 kids on the planet that I like spending time with. So I kind of, I wouldn't be the best mother, like super engaged, but I also would not be anything at all like that. But then she redeemed herself at the end by putting Zabu to bed.
Right, by parenting Zabu well. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
No, I do think it's funny. So for me as a parent, you can look at those really horrible things that she's doing with those kids, and although generally you do your best, although things happen, but that's why that's why I can find all of that stuff really funny, because you're so worried and you're so panicked as a parent, and you're like, oh, you would never do those things. And so to see somebody do it, you're like,
wish I could do that.
Yeah, I know. Wouldn't that be funny?
I guess I can crack the window in the van.
In Phoenix, there are no other options. You must roll that thing down.
You just take the kids with you in Phoenix.
Yeah, please,
yes.
God, yeah.
Don't really have the choice to crack the window.
Yes, but I can see that, for sure. And I liked Tinkerbala's arc quite a bit. So I think Zabu's arc was probably my favorite. I think Tinkerballa was my second favorite arc, coming to fruition with the guy at the end and sort of realizing that she had to let go to, get
she had to be vulnerable.
Yeah, she had to be vulnerable, which I thought was good. And oddly enough, Felicia Day's character has an arc, but it seems way subtler or something, because in thinking about it, it almost, it seems so tertiary to all of these other arcs, which seem bigger,
Well, I think for me on that one, like I go into this show or this series, the show's about her, the series is about her, it's her video blog, so of course she's gonna have a character arc, like of course there's gonna be this like progression, like it's expected that she'll grow and change, so I have that expectation, so it doesn't surprise me. But all the other characters growing with her, I'm like, oh, look at that, and for her I'm like, oh, whatever, she should. You owe me that much.
You owe me. Yeah, I actually found myself caring about their arcs more, although recognizing that, as is the case with 99% of ensemble shows, whether it's a drama or a comedy, the main protagonist, that primary character, is the glue. And that's really what she served, I think, more than anything, more than this big, arc where at the end of it, it's, a big deal. And of course, at the end it was, kind of bittersweet.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think she was, her presence and through her eyes we saw these characters, and that's what I found value in, for sure, more than just getting her every innermost thought, which is maybe what you would expect.
And that was very characteristic of Codex, was to focus on everybody else's problems instead of her own.
Yeah.
And then, oh, by the way, I'm also growing too. Her character arc was kind of not an afterthought, because I'm sure it was very intentional, but it was still secondary to everybody else, because that's just how Codex is.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I loved Codex's involvement in Tinkerballas.
Arc.
In Tink's arc,
Yeah,
and the sort of like close relationship that they got, that is not what I think media portrays like women's relationships to be. Like women, they shop and they go out and blah blah blah, and they form this very like, we come from very different places, but like we've kind of forged this like real friendship outside of the game. And I think that was really, I loved that part of it.
And she, more than anyone, was really intentional about trying to learn more about Tink. So the fact that she was there when it was like that big reveal that she'd been adopted, and was there while her quirky family was, super supportive, I think is nice, because everyone else kind of like wrote it off as, oh, Tink's not going to give us any details, but she kept asking.
Yeah, exactly. She cared enough to keep asking. I also really appreciated in the series, which I think speaks to Felicia Day's cleverness and polish and what she does, is all of the mechanics of her speaking into the web camera and how they worked in various game mechanics sort of into the telling of the story, which I thought worked.
I liked that.
I thought it was so funny when they're in the hotel room and they all need to get on their computers, even though they're all in the same room to have a conversation and stuff like that. But I thought that was all just really funny and clever.
All in that shot with all of them, like the one screenshot, of what they're seeing on their computers, but it's everybody else, like the webcam views.
Right.
Where everybody is still in the shot, but it's like behind her. I liked that, the composition of that shot.
And sadly still very accurate. Like that was at its time endemic of gamer behavior, but now that would be us with smartphones, like that's
with
not
our
so shocking.
what's it called? FaceTime.
Yeah, FaceTime. Yeah, but people,
it's like, where are you going with that?
Yeah,
I know, right?
Yeah, but, people are in the same room and on a phone, and that's an also interesting aspect where gamers have been, and just geeks in general have been ahead of mainstream
that
trends.
Yeah.
Whether it's you're talking about forums and being online and forming friendships online and being on technology and not having face-to-face conversations even though you're in the same room. And now that's all normal.
Well, and it goes back to she talks a little bit about the online, like how we carry ourselves online too, in the very end of her series when the game creator comes out, and I cannot remember his name off the top of my head now.
Oh yeah,
Floyd Petrovsky.
Floyd.
Yeah,
Thank
Floyd.
you. You're so good. When Floyd comes out and he's just like, if you guys love my game so much, like why do you always say such bad stuff?
Right.
And they're all like, it's the internet. We all have low self-esteem and we don't have to look you in the face to say it.
Yep.
So, and I'm like, oh my god, that's so true for so much nowadays.
In everything. And again, used to be just gamers behaving badly, but now it's like anyone with an opinion and a smartphone or a Wi-Fi connection.
And the internet.
Yeah. So I mean, I thought in that way, she did have some clever commentary about, stuff going on in the world.
Yeah.
In certain states. I mean, in the series, it performed remarkably well. So they got picked up by Microsoft. That last season, you can tell they really got a boost of money for that last season.
Well, even season 5.
Yeah, but even season 5 to season 6 seems
the most polished.
Yeah, the most polished of all of them. And they, they did the Jones Soda. They got picked up doing comic books. I mean, it was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it was really big in the early 2000s.
Do you guys know what the story was behind that? It seemed not at all sudden or unexpected per se, but at the panel at CMX when Sandeep was like, "It's dead," and he said it in a way that made me think
he'd been asked a lot.
Either he'd been asked a lot, or maybe they had wanted to do more, or it wasn't worth it for them to do more. I mean, she managed. I don't know how she did it. Kudos to her and her
production partner.
Well, her agent, I think, being able to retain the rights, get the rights back.
From Microsoft?
Which is really freaking, like, you'd think that would be not possible in an ironclad contract with Microsoft. But however, they managed to do it. It just seemed really strange that things kind of went that route. Because my understanding is season 6 wasn't with Microsoft.
It wasn't. It was. And I think that was solely.
Yeah, it was all her.
All them.
Yeah. All them.
So they'd made enough money to actually sink it in.
I'm wondering. The feeling I got was that Microsoft was maybe there was too much outside input on creative control, and she just wanted to maintain that. So I'm wondering if she had like a 4-year contract, and when it was up, instead of being like, "Oh, we'll renew" or whatever, she was just like, "Nope. I'm taking it back. Like, I'm going to go do my own thing. I'll find a way to distribute it." Because I think it was only distributed through the website and then moved to YouTube.
Yeah, I think so too. But I mean, it's again so rare for any funding, any of those big companies to just do it. So obviously she had some foresight in that initial contract, or agent, or whoever had it. But the fact that they did it on their own, and if there was outside pressure, and maybe Microsoft was going in another direction, like they always say, it made it work. But I just those whole circumstances I thought were interesting, and I wasn't sure if there was any backstory behind that or anything.
Not that I know of.
Yeah. I just looked at Wikipedia, and it didn't give any. This is what happened, why it moved from Microsoft to YouTube for season 6, but it was featured on Felicia Day's YouTube channel, Geek and Sundry. So I wonder if she had YouTube legal power to get the rights from Microsoft.
That's a good point.
Felicia Day, if you want to contact us and fill us in, we'd love to know
what happened there.
Right, exactly.
Curious minds.
That's true. No, that's true. But let's talk about some of our favorite lines or things that we did enjoy. I think were particularly funny.
I wish you could see my face right now.
She's tenting. She's finger tenting.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Andrea, I went dark because I'm so serious.
Yes. Andrea cosplay as Clara.
It was adorable.
It was adorable.
They were so cute in their picture.
They had a squid hat. She had a squid hat and everything.
Oh, and I got to say, I loved it because we did that, and we tweeted the actress who plays Clara, Robin Thorson, who then got back to us and said, "Oh, it's a good effort, sweetie." And I was like, "Yeah, thank you, Robin." It like made my day.
So great. I definitely I love Vork with his super goodness, and he something they're trying to do something bad, and he's like, "It's against my alignment." Which I loved. And I love Zabu with his, "Do you like my helm? It's +5 dexterity." I mean, there were just some really funny lines.
There's some great
all about delivery.
Right.
You wait, is this in the drinking game where you said you liked him work in the shower?
Yes. I love that scene.
Which I guess
you
had said they thought was going to be over the top, and they talked about taking out, but they were like, "Oh no, we'll leave it in there.
We're leaving it in."
That's what made it funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Ridiculous.
How ridiculous it was.
Ridiculous.
And how he's always cooking food. I mean, it was just hysterical.
I love how he has an alignment. It's against his alignment, but he is a tax evading fraudulent.
He starts the black market.
Yeah, he's so his alignment is so weird
from his neighbor.
Yeah, he has
Alzheimer's.
Shame. Yeah, no shame. Yeah,
that's so true.
My favorite parts were all of the cameos in season.
I know, 5. Amazing.
Yeah,
right?
the Neil Gaiman one, and then especially the Stan Lee one.
Okay, so there's a funny story about the Stan Lee one
there is.
that Sandeep was telling the crowd at the Comic Media Expo about. Amy was talking. They were bantering back and forth about the butterfly costume that he wore,
which was fantastic.
Yeah, which was part of the Seat Savers
right
network. That he was like getting drunk with power, and he was saying that like he was really uncomfortable in that butterfly costume in front of Stan Lee because the butterfly costume wasn't boner friendly.
To which,
it wasn't boner safe. To which she replied.
Neither was Stan Lee.
Stan Lee is a boner safe, and he said he does like the ladies.
Yes.
Which I would not have guessed because I picture Stan Lee as like this adorable little grandpa.
No,
but apparently not.
Apparently never went there for Stan Lee.
Really?
And we have to talk about vagina loyalty because
I died.
I'm super into vagina loyalty.
So
Clara to me has just some of the
that was a funny line.
Yeah.
She got better. I didn't like her at first because I felt like her delivery was a little bit forced, but she got more comfortable in the role and more comfortable with her skills, and all of her little quips and one-liners actually did win me over.
Yeah.
She was like the Phoebe of the group. Because the whole time you're like underestimating her, and then like at the con she demonstrates a vast understanding of business.
The dirigible,
and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, you're a genius.
Yeah, well, and
evil genius.
When we started watching it for the podcast again, we watched like the first. I think Alice was over and we watched like the first season or two together, and we get to the part where, you know, Clara's like, I'm so into vagina loyalty, and I just like start dying. And Alice is like, do you need a minute? And I was like, that is so great.
We're all into vagina loyalty.
We are. We are a very, very vagina loyal group.
Mm-hmm. It's our vagenda.
Yes. Vagenda.
Yes. Excellent. Oh, we forgot to mention that during Sandeep and Amy's panel, that when she was talking about those cameos, she called Neil Gaiman that writer guy. And
and I thought everyone in the audience would die.
And Sandeep. And I was just like, I feel you, Amy. I feel you.
It was.
Sorry. Sarah's like
freaking out right now.
Is like about to
I don't know what.
Slice me with her eye lasers.
Well, and on that note, when we're talking about those guests, they were also saying that Sandeep said one of his favorite parts about that season with all of the guests in season 5 was the fact that all of them were there because they wanted to be there.
Right.
Like, not because they were being paid or it was, you know, written for them to be there. Like, all of them that we saw were there because they liked the show and supported the show and they wanted to be a part of it. So I thought that was really cool too.
Yeah, they're all buddies.
Yeah, it was a good mix, I think, of people too.
Yeah,
a good mix of celebrities. Kind of covered all the genre. I liked the show a lot.
I enjoyed it.
I like that Sarah appreciates it.
I appreciate it. I see what you did there. I didn't love it, but I see what you did.
I feel like that's a meme or something. Like, we need a picture of Sarah just tilted head.
Like, see what you did there. See what you did there.
I kind of wanted to talk about the production, how the production improved over the course of the series.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I brought up at the Comic Media Expo panel.
You got it right.
I brought up at our CMX panel that, and I bring this up all the time, but Alice and I got to know each other very well, and Cassie too.
Watching crappy movies, and you know, some of the submissions to the famous Comic-Con Film Festival were not as good as the other ones, and the production value of the first couple of episodes in the first season were
rough.
Yeah. Yes, they weren't bad, they were rough. And it put me back in that mode where I was like, where's my form? I need to like give them a 2 for sound design and
it should be noted though that was that time in filmmaking before DSLRs were super prevalent. So I would not be surprised if that first season was shot on a non-DSLR of some kind, because you can really,
especially if it's homegrown. Like,
well, it was like 2008, 2007, so that was just not common. Yeah. So and then as things just progressed from an indie filmmaker standpoint at a really rapid pace. So you can tell in like season 3 that they were using DSLRs, and then by season 6 they were probably, I don't even use, no.
Let me point out, Cassie, that you could tell.
I'm sitting here just smiling like, woo, yeah, all right.
Like, I could definitely, no. Well, I mean, I have the same reaction to the production quality, but I don't have enough experience to be like, that shot on DSL,
well,
and that shot on.
Sometimes it is hard, but I just remember that time period in general, just because that's right around the time when I almost graduated. I was like a year away from graduating from Cronkite, and we were shooting on mini DV tapes, which was still.
I have some of those.
Yeah, I do too. I know, all
I do too.
in the vault, and it was only 6 years ago, and now it's so insane. So I remember just that trajectory from an industry standpoint for indie filmmakers. But those first few episodes, just in terms of direction and everything, they smoothed it out over the
for sure
the latter part of that first season for sure.
For sure, I concur completely.
And with that growth and that was also during the time when this came out and was real popular that. You had like the television writer strike, and
we will not speak of that time.
That
that dark
era.
We were all on vacation. And during a lot of the time where like self-funding indie stuff became kind of like self-producing things became big. So actually, when Joss Whedon produced Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, he picked Felicia Day based on her performance and work with the Guild. And has said before that like part of her doing it herself was an inspiration to him. That when that writer's strike happened, and he was like, "Fine, I'm just gonna do it myself. Screw you guys." So it's really interesting to see because I also really love. That's one of my favorite, just kind of like short arcs, I guess, short works. But so it's really interesting to see how like one can affect so much more than that.
Right. All right. Well, thank you for joining us at the Comic and Media. No, just kidding.
Well, thank you when you did join us.
Thank you for those of you who did join us at the panel. Indeed. Thank you for that. In the studio today, it's been Alice,
Andrea,
Sara,
and Cassie.
And if you don't already subscribe to our podcast, you should do that. You can do that on either Stitcher or iTunes. If you subscribe, you get immediate access to our newest content when it gets posted. But don't forget to also come to the website at educatinggeeks.com to check out all of the other content that we put up on a regular basis. You can check us out on social media. Use hashtag educatinggeeks to find us. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, and Google+. Next up on the podcasts, both Educating Geeks and the Educating Geeks Drinking Game Rules, Jonathan from Lightning Octopus is going to join us for a discussion of the video game Journey.
Woo!
So tune in for that for sure. Talk to y'all later.
Bye.
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 She's practicing her syllables.
And you were doing your Zabu.